Don't let us hang around this and let what others say come true. We're just good enough. They all think a boy should know.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Darker Than Blue. It is Friday, April 17th, and it's 5 o'clock. So that must mean I am Jacqueline Lukman. And yes, this is Darker Than Blue, the show here on WPFW where we talk about politics for the people that you just heard Brother Curtis Mayfield say are darker than blue. I hope you all have had a fantastic Friday. I have been enjoying the music here on WPFW today. It's been one of my lazy days that I think I didn't realize how busy I have been the past few years. So when I have a day when I don't have anything on my calendar and I don't have any meetings, I'm nervous. So I don't quite know what to do with a day with no commitments, but I do have a commitment today, and that's a commitment to come and hang out with you at 5 o'clock and shoot the breeze about what is going on in this world. And there's no amount of lazy days that's ever going to stop me from doing that. So let's get into this because dear listeners and viewers over on YouTube, shout out to you all on YouTube and Facebook and on the Instagrams and everywhere. And absolutely shout out to all our listeners and friends on WPFW 89.3 FM. So this week, I really have been paying attention to these videos coming out of Iran, these war propaganda videos, and that's what they are. That's not an insult. Propaganda is not a negative word all by itself. We've talked about this before, so it's okay. Iranians aren't trying to turn you against the country. They're literally using Legos to tell Americans the truth because, well, we're not all that intellectually rigorous here. Um, and despite what a lot of us understand or believe about, the supremacy of this country and the global respect everyone around the world has for America. Yeah, most people in the world realize that a lot of American citizens can't possibly be that smart because that they're looking at us not responding to the ways this government are not just abusing them with our tax dollars, but they're also looking at the way we are not responding to the way they're abusing us. They are looking us respond to our abuse from this government that they would never tolerate in their own countries, even if their governments are US propped up dictators and fascists. Like, people in other countries get ticked off at their governments and will take to the streets and stay in those streets at the drop of a hat. What do? We wait for somebody to announce a global protest. We don't just do, okay, that's another conversation. I'm getting off track already. It's been a week, I told you. But I have been noticing and enjoying a lot. It's a guilty pleasure. I'm just going to admit it. I love those videos from Iran, and there is the group of people, or at least representatives of the collective of groups of people, young people in Iran who produce these videos. I'd said from the beginning that these videos are not, this is not like the Iranian established government, the existing government doing it, because they're all old men. Right, except for they're all, except for Khamenei Jr., which is what people are calling him. He's not really a junior, but he is the son of the martyred Ayatollah Khamenei. He is younger, but most of the government in Iran is held. The offices are held by older people. Like, I'm 58, so most governments in the world are populated or are run by people who are my age and older. Which generation am I in? X? I think I'm still Gen X, I guess. So I noticed from the beginning that in the first videos that came out, I noticed immediately that this was not like quote unquote official Iranian government propaganda, because old folks don't have that kind of that don't have that kind of cultural literacy to be able to have that kind of an immediate cultural connection with a generation of people around the world. But right, like, let's just be serious. And as an older person myself, I will tell you, yeah, some of us are pretty tech savvy like me, but I still don't entirely understand these social networks and the algorithms and social media marketing. That's why I have never gone viral on TikTok, because I've never had a TikTok account, because I don't really understand how it works. And it's just, I got too much stuff to do. But these kids are on the pulse of how their generation receives and disseminates information. So these videos, to me, I immediately noticed the generational, what it represents as far as the generation of Iranians who are creating these videos. And even though they are not a part of the established government, the fact that it is Iranian youth who are doing this of their own volition, they were not asked to do it. They're not, no, they're not hired by the Iranian government to wage a propaganda war against the United States like Israel has done since the US forced China to sell TikTok to a US company, because the US company is owned by a Zionist. And now TikTok is specifically being used because it had the power of international reach. It really is where a lot of people got information, good or bad. So they understood this, the capitalists, the Zionists, they understood this, and they had to get rid of the influence of TikTok in disseminating the truth about the genocide in Gaza. So this campaign against media, and against social media in particular, that impacts a particular generation of people, was an intentional campaign waged by the United States government to control social media in order to control what you think, see, and believe, or see, think, and believe. I think that's the proper order. Yeah, yes. And remember that the whole TikTok thing didn't start with Trump. Remember, Biden. Okay? So I really started thinking about the the utility of these videos, the strategy behind their production and how they're distributed, how they're made, why Lego videos in particular. Because youth like cute things. I think that's kind of true. We've sort of seen that. And I think there's an interview that I'll put the interview and the links that I come up with that we talk about in the description of the YouTube video. So when you're listening on WPFW, go to Black Liberation Media on YouTube, go to this video, and you'll see all of the links that we're talking about. So I'll put the link to the interview that the representatives of this collective did, and explained why they did these videos the way they do. And they admitted that they did the Legos because they're cute, and everybody likes cute. Right? It was really that simple. And don't you just love them? Now here's the thing. They use cute animation to tell absolute truth, because they know that the US propagandizes its own people and propagandizes colonialized and oppressed people around the world through its NGO, or not NGO, through its government apparatuses. Or yeah, no, there would be NGOs. That's what they describe themselves as, like Voice of America. It's the media, the media arm of empire abroad. Voice of America is, the National Endowment for Democracy, NED. That is a non-governmental organization that is absolutely a prop of U.S. imperialism, right? They know this about how the U.S. operates. They also know the history of the United States of America and the history of colonialism and imperialist aggression from the West projected to the rest of the world. And that is what they are conveying in these adorable, hilarious, banging YouTube videos with Legos. They're using that imagery that's pleasing to the eye and the music that is catchy. And yes, it is intentional that it's hip hop and rap that they're using because, again, they're youth. They are the youth. That is what they listen to all over the world. And hip hop and rap, if you listen to any music aficionado on this station in particular, they will tell you hip hop and rap is the soundtrack for resistance all over the world since the oppressed in this country created the art form. Come on now. They are paying us a huge a huge amount of respect and paying a great deal of homage to the genre and its anti imperialist, anti capitalist, working class and poor roots. So no, Iran is also not using hip hop and rap to get black people to turn against our government, as a video that I saw um this earlier this week claimed. Yes, it was a young black lady, and a young black lady, a millennial, dressed oddly like a Sunday school teacher. I didn't understand the top buttoned all the way up to the top collar with the, I mean, buttoned all the way up to the throat. You understand me, with the teacher sweater on, and the respect. It was very weird, but she did say, I think Iran is using hip hop to turn black Americans against our government. And I think when I saw that video, and I'm thinking about these videos from Iran, and the interview they did explaining their video, saying, look, we know Americans don't know their own history because we know that their government doesn't tell them the truth. So we wanted to tell Americans the truth, but Americans themselves tell us that they don't watch the news because they know they're being lied to. So we're figuring, how do we get the truth about what America is doing to us, what is really happening in Iran, because they see the propaganda, the lies from the US government and US media about what is going on. So they're wondering, how do we get people who don't trust their government, that their government lies to them, that their media lies to them through the government, how do we get those people to know the truth about what's going on? How do we get their attention? Cartoon Lego videos and banging hip hop. I'm not mad at it. I'm not mad at it because these young folks in Iran did the thing that we don't do very much or very well in this country. They studied our material conditions. So they understand why we don't respond to these things the way they would respond if their government did some of the things that this government has done to us. There are more protests in Iran when people are unhappy with the government has done, and somehow they manage to work those things out. We never hear about that. And there's a reason for that. That's what we're going to talk about today. So, listen, I think Iran's propaganda war against the US is so successful with these videos because the US legislated and propagandized its population into ignorance. With a media landscape that's dominated today by a few corporate voices and an education system that has historically deprioritized analytical skills and just basic truth, public susceptibility to lies spread by the government through the media has grown, and this has real world impacts on us and on people around the world. But when we're just talking about us, think about how easily people were convinced that vaccination now is evil. And I'm not even talking about limiting it to the COVID vaccine. I'm talking about now because of all of this, what I don't even know what to call it, the anti-vax movement on social media social media didn't create it. The ideas were spread by social media. So it turned into a situation where now people are suspicious of the COVID vaccine. Okay, that's fine. But then it turned into all vaccines are bad. All health mandates are bad. All and now we have a measles outbreak in that's spreading in the United States right now. Diseases like polio that have been vaccinated out of existence. So we thought somehow there are cases of them popping back up, right? This is what I mean when we're talking about people being more susceptible to lies and disinformation because of anti-intellectualism and the lack of structural literacy among Americans and critical thinking. It's not an accident. The decline in these things, in literacy and critical thinking among US citizens, it's not the result of a single cause, but it's a convergence of a bunch of failures. And actually, no, not failures, intentional manipulations to bring about the collapse across education, the education system, the media landscape, and economic structures. And these issues have created this echo chamber feedback loop where a population with weakened reading skills, it's not that people cannot read, it's not that they literally cannot read words on a page, it's that they cannot internalize, analyze, and determine what they read means. They can't analyze it and determine whether it's the truth or not the truth, what it means to them, because their reading comprehension and critical thinking skills are so uh, um, intentionally suppressed by the people that benefit from us being uninformed. All right. So this weakness in reading skills is it's what makes us more vulnerable to the lies that are spread to make it sound like it's the truth, right? So we can't tell the difference. And that is what further erodes our ability to think critically. So here are some of the things that I think have contributed to us needing to be taught our history and the truth about what is going on in an ongoing, unprovoked war of aggression against Iran from some Lego cartoon videos, and why that's more effective than us telling people to just read. Okay, well, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that. I know you never thought I would say something like that, but I'm going to get to that. So there is this thing which I didn't even realize was a thing because I'm not an educator, but I do love to read, and I notice things about the different ways that you can read. Like for somebody who I need glasses, but I don't have like a visual impairment, that means I cannot read on a page. Um, Audiobooks are fantastic for people with visual impairments. They're necessary. They're great. But for people without visual impairments, maybe audiobooks aren't great because I notice when I listen to an audiobook, I don't get as much of the meaning, and it doesn't seem like as an immersive an experience as reading the story. And that's just me, but I can't assume that I'm the only one who has that feeling. So when we're thinking of different ways to do a thing that is more convenient and time, I don't know, more uh, uh, that takes less time. I think that's what I'm trying to say. That is less time consuming because that's always the key. We say we don't do things because we don't have time to do things. And the system is designed to keep us busy trying to survive. So, yes, I absolutely understand. It is hard to find some time to read for enjoyment when you are working 2.5 jobs in order to just keep a roof over your head, food on the table, and if you have kids, to make sure your kids are safe from whatever's going on out in the streets, and also from the cops, and now from the National Guard. You understand what I'm saying? So I understand not having time to read is a very real issue. But I want people to understand the reason you don't have time to read or for any leisure is because the capitalist system does not want you to have those things. Because when people, particularly workers, have time, downtime, leisure time to pursue and do things that they enjoy, that can enrich themselves personally as people, what do people do? They go and learn new stuff. That is what human beings do. And the capitalists can't have the workers learning that they have things like human rights, right? So there is a thing about the science behind reading and how people learn to read, how people learn to recognize and sound out words. Are we teaching children to learn how to read by showing them pictures of things and guessing what that is? Or are we teaching children to learn to identify and associate words with things by teaching children the word? And then teaching them what the word means and then showing them what it means so that they internalize the word and the meaning and what it means to them in a different way than just saying, right? So that's the scientific kind of academic issue with how we learn to read and how that impacts whether we become readers in our older years or not. And I think most of us recognize this in either middle school or high school, particularly. At least I don't know if they still do this. I hope to God they still do. But remember the book clubs, the scholastic book fairs. That's what they were. The scholastic book fairs that most middle schools and high schools had at some point, a few times throughout the year. In most high schools, we certainly had them here in DC. I went to Ballou Senior High School. I went to what was that, Congress Heights Middle School, and then it was named Malcolm X Middle School. We had the scholastic book fairs, and I became a voracious reader of serious books in middle school. But I started with comic books in elementary school. But I also started with PBS and Sesame Street and Reading Rainbow. But I also started with my mom reading to me. But then in school, we learned to read through phonics. We would be introduced a new word in class, and we would, the teacher would go through the syllabization of the word, how many syllables are in it, what the emphasis is on what part of the word the emphasis is on that you pronounce, and all that kind of stuff. So words become these complex, fascinating things that have these meanings that are consequential. That's what it felt like in my head. And again, I can't assume that just because it happened, that's the way I thought about it, that I'm the only person who thought about it this way. I'm not thinking that everybody thought about it that way, but I know that that is how I fell in love with words and reading. I am wondering if other kids who had the same experience as I did, particularly from my generation, the Gen X's, I wonder if our experience with those different ways of learning helped us be more open to reading than later generations were, because those structures were changed in public education, right? So that's one that's like, I guess, the scientific academic kind of aspect of how people become readers. You don't just put a book in front of somebody and say, here, this is some important information for you to learn, open it up and read it. And no, you the love of reading develops from somewhere. The question is the love of reading being developed by the way we teach our children how to read, right? So this really does matter because, like I said, science has and studies have shown that the way children learn how to read does influence whether they become fluent readers or not. There are studies that show that 95% of students have the cognitive capacity to read. They can read, right? But nearly 40% of fourth graders read below basic levels because they were not given the right tools to read effectively, right? And this fundamentally limits the ability to engage with complex texts later in life, which is the foundation of critical thinking. I hope that made sense because I hope you understand now why what we teach children in schools and how we teach children in schools, and I mean the little ones, pre-K, kindergarten, daycare, yes, how they learn matters. So the other thing that I think has contributed to I'm going to call it the dumbification of Americans. I'm sorry, but I can't think of any more because my critical thinking has been suppressed by this heat these past 2 days in this country. But the other thing I think contributes to this lack of critical thinking or weak critical thinking skills in this country that is fueled by this manufactured and imposed illiteracy, basically, are standardized testing. Standardized testing. We all hate standardized testing, and we all know that there's a serious problem with standardized testing. We just don't quite know what the problem is and how it connects to the bigger thing. So the standardized teaching to the test cycle in public education is federal education policy, particularly established by No Child Left Behind, the No Child Left Behind Act that was passed in 2001. Guess who was president then? Anyway, um, and then that by Bush, that's where it came from in 2001, was continued by the next guy, doubled down, expanded. Yep, said it was the best thing since sliced bread. Yeah, the results weren't great in the first iteration, but we can do better. We can't leave any children behind. That's what Obama said. And then he expanded and gave the program money, but more money. And it is still the standard in the United States in most public schools today. This No Child Left Behind initiative tied school funding and student progression to standardized test scores. So, literally, public schools that were supposed to be guaranteed federal funding because they provide education to everyone in the country, which is a function to educate the populace of the government. They said, no, we're not going to give them, we're not just going to give them money. They're going to have to prove they deserve the money. And how are they going to prove they deserve the money? Why? By passing these standardized tests. And of course, the tests are rigged, the tests are garbage, the tests don't really measure anything other than what kids remember. They do not measure, the testing doesn't measure the level of understanding, the level of the depth of knowledge students have, whether they truly grasp a topic. Doesn't Those tests don't measure any of that. It just measures what they remember. And if they remember dates, names, and certain approved facts well enough to pass the test. Public school funding was tied to No Child Left Behind, standardized test scores. That led to a very narrow curriculum that stripped out everything that was not focused on rote memorization and bubble filling to pass the test rather than learning for enrichment and analysis, right? So this wasn't the primary driver of illiteracy and media illiteracy, in particular, federal education policy like this. But this has been criticized for stifling critical thinking skills, which are essential for navigating media. See, this is why it's fine and it's okay and it's actually a very good thing to have several different media outlets in any country or community that express different viewpoints. Because if the population is educated well enough in order to read and critically think about what they are reading and to analyze what they read based on what they see, material facts, and history that they know, they are able to determine the truth from lies much more than people who do not have avenues for even exercising and engaging in critical thinking. So, having a media outlet that provides an approved narrative about everything is the most unhealthy environment for an educated populace to exist in. And lest you think that people in Iran and people in China and people in Russia and people in those countries that we are told are evil communist dictatorships and the like Venezuela, the government controls the media. The exact opposite is true in those countries. The exact opposite. And I'm not just saying that because I'm defending them. I'm saying that because I've been there, and they have no problem, unless we're talking about publishing what do you call it, treasonous material or threats against people and institutions that no state should tolerate. Chaos from the inside, right? But that these countries have media outlets that offer critiques of the government, that challenge the government narrative. Yeah, they do exist. More and more, that does not exist in this country. So the communist lack of free speech dictatorship that we think the Chinese and the Iranians and the Venezuelans and the Cubans are living in. No, we're living that. We're living in that. That's this country. Okay. So the testing era of No Child Left Behind and its successors uh, absolutely forced schools to teach to the test, and like I said, reduce time for teaching other subjects that foster analysis and inquiry, like civics, which doesn't even exist in a lot of schools anymore. So and the arts and media studies. So that's why you have people coming out of high school now who do not know what this country's government has done to their communities, to the things this government has done to make their families' lives so difficult, and they're ready to join up for the military, not understanding that the only reason they only have the military as an option for a career right out of high school is because they live in a capitalist system that has removed all opportunities for economic stability and certainly advancement from the working class and poor, so that they can keep those people as the fodders, the cannon fodder to maintain this capitalist and imperialist system. They have to keep you from knowing all of the ways they are limiting your choices, so that you never know that the reason you keep approving of what they do, you keep supporting what they do, you keep going along with what they tell you to do, is because they're actually the ones setting all this up to make sure you don't have any choices. You can never know that. That's why they've done all this, to manipulate what you see, what you think, and what you know, what you believe. So when we look at this kind of stuff in the context of the public education system and what was simultaneously going on in federal government in certain areas that may seem disconnected begin to coalesce into a larger system. And I hope we are understanding now why our dumbification in this country, so that we don't understand capitalism and imperialism and militarism, so that we don't know that we are being lied to by all of the politicians and the media, but we still keep voting for these people and we still keep listening to what they say. I hope I'm helping you understand why this is not a situation of people are being lazy and they don't want to read and they don't want to know this information. The fact that we do not know this information is systemic. It is intentional. It's not a moral failing. It is by design. So we're going to pick up on that on the other side of this break. It's a little past 30 minutes past the hour. You know what time it is. You know what that means, folks. It's time for a WPFW station break. So, engineer extraordinaire, what's on tap for the people today?
On Sunday, April 19th, Ujima Shule of Washington, D.C., the oldest independent nonprofit African-centered school in the United States, will celebrate its 58th anniversary on Sunday, April 19th from 2:30 to 6:30 p.m. at 1 Veterans Plaza, Silver Spring, Maryland. The special occasion will include dinner, a performance by Conquerana West African Dance Company, and diverse community leaders sharing their contributions to African people and how Ujima inspired or influenced their work. Details are at 202-232-2997 or email at ujamaschool1@verizon.net. The email is ujamaa school1@verizon.net. WPFW is your station for jazz and justice, building a better world one broadcast at a time.
Thank you so much. And of course, you know, if you recognize the voice, that's our comrade Netfa Freeman with Pan-African Community Action. Also, another fantastic programmer here on WPFW. Check out Voices with Vision on, I think it's Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but do check out Voices with Vision and our comrades Netfa Freeman. And go to Pan-African Community Action, PACA Power on Instagram. I think it's PACA DMV on Instagram. And check out the latest events that PACA holds on a regular basis in Southeast DC. So let's get back to this conversation about the systemic dumbing down of America that has put us in this position where people really believe that Pete Keg's breath really did get up in front of those people at that prayer service at the Pentagon and recited the lines from Pulp Fiction, claiming they are from the Bible. They're not. He did that. Yes, he did. He really did that. He quoted the lines from Samuel L. Jackson's iconic scene in Pulp Fiction, claiming that that is taken from what is that? I think it's Ezekiel. He said it's Ezekiel 25:17 or something. It's not. It's not. It is not. Ezekiel 25:17 is like a sentence and a half. That whole monologue from Samuel L. Jackson was made up. It's not in the Bible. It's not real. It's not. But Pete Keg's breath said it was. And he said that it was from the Bible. And the people in that room sat there and bowed their heads. So when I am presenting this information, dear friends, I'm not like saying that the system is doing this only to one group of people. No, this is systemic, that all of us have been subjected to. And the ones who catch it are the ones who have deprogrammed or are in the process of deprogramming ourselves from this foolishness. It's not that we're smarter than anybody else is that we realize, wait a minute, this is all a setup. Information is being kept from us. And why is that? That's what has happened for a lot of us, right? And for others of us, we had access to education and information that was different, that was more robust, even if it was still whitewashed of certain history. It was still a little bit more robust than it is now. Right. So that's why some of us who are a little bit older know things about what this government has done around the world that younger generations don't know because they weren't taught in school. And where are you finding the truth being depicted about the United States and its militarism and warmongering around the world in any version of media in this country? So we know that the dumbification of Americans is absolutely true among the Christian. Come on now. Tuesday. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Somebody texted me. Thank you. Voices with Vision Tuesdays at 9 a.m. I get my days mixed up, y'all. My life is a mess. So so let's talk about deregulation now. Because we always, in this country, when politicians talk about deregulation, they're always talking about deregulation in industry. It's always like environmental regulation when they talk about deregulations. Lessening regulations on corporations so that they can be unshackled and grow jobs, and they never do. The deregulations just helps them make more money because they don't have to pay the fines that they inevitably violate through the regulate. That's why they take the regulation. Yeah. So deregulation in media consolidation, though, is absolutely a part of the intentional process of imposing imposing and encouraging anti-intellectualism in the United States, because that led to the decline of local journalism, the legislative deregulation, specifically through the 1996 Telecommunications Act. We talked about that at length a couple of months ago. Has had an incredible impact on the media that we see now, because it's allowed a handful of corporations to control the vast majority of all US media outlets. The most significant legislative contributor of this phenomenon is, of course, the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Now, again, they said it was intended to foster competition. That's the lie capitalists always tell when they are about to pass a piece of legislation that allows corporate entities to exploit more people and make more money. That's literally what they mean. Its actual impact was directly destroying the diversity and quality of information that is made available to the public. So the act eliminated national caps on radio station ownership, leading to a rapid wave of mergers. By 2003, the number of companies controlling America's media had shrunk from 50 in 1984 to just 6. And today, it's less than that. The reduced local news and voices allowed a handful of giants like Clear Channel and iHeartMedia and Sinclair Media to dominate local markets instead of a more local programming on local news stations and radio stations. News staff shrank by 44%. Minority ownership decreased, reducing the range of perspectives and original reporting. But then there was the end of the fairness doctrine. Although that wasn't a part of the 1996 Telecommunications Act, the 1987 elimination of the fairness doctrine, yes, the fairness doctrine was eliminated first in 1987. That required broadcasters to cover controversial issues fairly. That is what the fairness doctrine did. That's why it's called the Fairness Doctrine, because it was a requirement for broadcasters in all media to cover controversial issues fairly. So as a material example for this, when BET was first established and they had all of those fantastic news programs, there was a news program where they broadcast from Gaza, I believe it was. It was either Gaza or it was a refugee camp somewhere else. I think that Israel had bombed, and they had massacred a bunch of people in that camp. There was a black reporter who was reporting on the massacre, calling it a massacre, calling it the precursor to a genocide, calling it evil, calling out, why is the US backing Israel? The US has to do something about this. This is wrong. You will never see or hear or read any kind of critique of the genocide in Gaza and the burgeoning genocide in Lebanon right now from any US media outlet that exists, because of the elimination of the fairness doctrine in 1987. Mhm. So then in 1996, along comes the Telecommunications Act that supercharged media deregulation, allowing outlets to thrive on one sided opinion rather than balanced public service journalism. Again, I'm not saying that before the fairness doctrine was repealed, that media was perfect and it was great and it was, just fair and they told it. No, but they did have a requirement enforced by government law, by federal law, that they literally had to tell the truth, that they had to give a countering opinion to one side. And it didn't matter what side it was. If they gave one side of an opinion, they had to broadcast the other opinion. That doesn't exist anymore because of the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine in 1988. So this mega merger trend has gutted local newsrooms, reduced the number of reporters who hold local power accountable. Can you imagine if here in DC, local News 4, Channel 5, Channel 7, Channel 9, anchors, news anchors, and broadcasters would be the ones at these town halls saying, last year when you were running, or, last campaign when you were running, you said, but you didn't do, because see, they're the ones who are supposed to be holding the records for the people. They're supposed to be the mouthpiece of the people too. So, but they're not doing that because of this. Okay, so when one company controls 80% of the market, communities lose those diverse viewpoints and watchdog journalism. The information ecosystem shifts from serving the public interest to serving corporate profitability, leaving you with fewer reliable sources and more partisan echo chambers. And in this country right now, all of the echo chambers of the media are conservative owned, even if they claim to be Democratic Party leaning. Because guess what, y'all? The Democratic Party is not a left party. They are a center right party. And center is a question. That word center is doing a lot of work in describing the Democrats. What are the Republicans? Obviously far right fascists. The Democrats, okay, center right fascist. All right. But then there is also poverty and resource. Uh-huh. Yeah. Because in a capitalist society, access to everything, including information, is determined by your ability to afford it. Have you noticed how all of the major news outlets like CNN and MSNBC, and I know they changed their name. I don't care what it is. All of these major out Reuters, and they have subscription services. Now they want you to subscribe online. Yeah, that's so now people who don't have the extra money every month for 5 subscriptions to major newspapers that they think they're getting a diversity of information from, but they're really getting the same information told in the same way during using different words because the same people own all of those media platforms. But see, literacy is intrinsically linked to economics. Nearly 80% of adults living in poverty read at the lowest levels. Schools in impoverished areas often lack access to high quality materials, experienced teachers, early intervention programs for learning disabilities, right? What does this mean? The achievement gap between wealthy and poor students is massive. And it's not an achievement gap, it's an access gap. It is an access gap based on capitalist exploitation and racialized capitalism in particular. Poor students do less well than students who live in wealthy neighborhoods who go to schools that are funded by those high property taxes that those rich people can pay. Poor kids go to publicly funded schools in which the city councils and the federal governments are always fighting over how much more money they can take from those schools because they use the excuse that those kids aren't learning. So we're wasting money on kids who don't want to learn. But the people who are defunding the public schools are the very same people who impose the system to make access to information based on access to wealth. So students struggling with literacy, mostly poor, are 4 times less likely to graduate high school, perpetuating a cycle where low literacy leads to low income, which leads to the next generation receiving less educational support at home. And of course, all of this contributes to the rise of disinformation and intellectual apathy. Even for people with basic reading skills, the modern digital environment discourages deep analysis. The shift towards sound bites, social media algorithms, and AI generated content prioritizes outrage and speed over accuracy. And this is the one criticism I will have for those Iranian Lego videos. They're giving you a snapshot of the truth you're not being told. You should not take that as the whole story, though. You should take that and look into what else about this are they not telling me? And go, I'm not going to say don't go research for yourself, but you're sitting right there at the internet. Go look some things up and then go to your local library and put your hands on some books and and get more information that way. But adults, this is why adults are reading less complex material today. Many lack the stamina to read long form journalism or historical documents. And this makes the population highly susceptible to misinformation. What I said about, the vaccination rates and just believing anything anybody shares with them on social media because it kind of sounds like it's true. They sound like they know what they're talking about, right? And in a country that is supposed to be a democracy, this does matter. Why? Because the inability to read critically has direct economic and civic consequences. The US economy loses $2.2 trillion annually due to low adult literacy rates, affecting workplace productivity and public health. What does that mean? Adults can't read prescription labels. If adults can't read a prescription label, how can they ask about what it is they're taking? If they can't ask about what it is they're taking, how can they explain when they're taking something that makes them feel unwell? How can they explain to someone who has years more education than they do in a specific field? Yes, but years of education and critical thinking skills that they don't have. How can a person without that kind of self advocacy advocate for themselves? They cannot. They can't. If everything is done online, how can people who have low literacy and critical thinking skills navigate all of the complex instructions for how to fill out government forms, for how to, do you see what I mean? This is not a matter of just grown folks don't like to read. This is a matter of illiteracy and anti-intellectualism are intentionally imposed systemic campaigns that have created the population that exists now, that is doing exactly what you're seeing, not knowing how to really respond to absolute government oppression on them, while the same government is murdering people around the world, but telling us here, well, they deserve it because of all the other lies we told y'all about in the past, that we gate kept all of the information from you for, so that you don't really learn about what really happened and what we really did. So we have to understand, I think, that everything that we experience in our colonized, imperialist, indoctrinated societies, in our domestic colonies, every antisocial kind of behavior that we experience, that we see, that we struggle with, our confusion, our lack of trust in the government, and really our apathy and our desire to disconnect from it all and act like it's just not a thing. We can put our heads down and ride it out, and it'll be okay and somebody else will fix it. All of this, it is not a result of Americans being uniquely ignorant or stubborn or uncaring or uncompassionate because they're Americans, and it's not because they're most are white. It is because capitalism takes whatever it can use and commodifies it, systematizes it, institutionalizes it, and then normalizes it while they make money. They commodify everything. So if a small group of people over here have a problem with abusing women, capitalism comes in, colonizes those people, and says, well, we could stop you from doing that. We could address that. But you know what? If this is your tradition, who are we to step in the way of destroying your tradition? As long as, we're not going to mess with your tradition, as long as you don't mess with us governing this colony and making as much money off of your exploitation and what we tell you are going to be the jobs and the opportunities that we provide for you, that you don't understand are actually exploitation. That's why this is so important, because this lack of information, this gatekeeping of information, this watering down and stripping down of education, that's not an unintentional consequence of capitalism and imperialist settler colonial domination. That is a key factor in its success and the way it maintains its power over the population. But I am out of time. Woo, I'm way over time. So sorry. Thank you for joining. Next week, we're going to talk about the beginning of all of this, which is not Project 2025. It's the Powell Memo. Join me next week. Until then, a luta continua, the struggle continues. But if we keep learning, I promise, Victoria Acerta. Peace.
Don't let us hate.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for joining. Just a couple of minutes. I wanted to check out the comments over here. Looks like we got a very low number of people. I don't know what's going on. It just feels, I think a lot of people are outside because it's warm and it's nice, and you should be, and that's beautiful. Hey, thank you so much. Appreciate you so much. Free New Africa, $5. Tithes and offerings. I appreciate you. Thank you. I can finally tell my dad, who is an elder in the Church of God in Christ, who really wanted me to be a pastor, and like, look, Dad, I have a church. he loves what I do. He'll sneak in sometimes and drop me a note. Hey, baby, and I really love that. So I appreciate y'all hanging out. Thanks, Rao, Terry Conley, 5580, Toe Jam 21, DS Sequoia, Leah Boggs, Wilfred 73. I start with words. Ex Cobra Commander, Free Palestine, Chichimacha 1025. Thank you all so much for joining. I appreciate you. Lene, hey, it's good to see you, friend. I'm so glad to see you. It's good to see you. Good to see you around again. I'm glad you're doing okay. Let's see who else we got here. XD, thank you. How are you? Good to see you. Hillwood 365. Hey, Sion 11 1 11 12. I appreciate y'all. So yeah, I really wanted to I've been wanting to talk about the Powell Doctrine for a very long time, because when people started kind of losing their minds about Project 2025, everything was about Project 2025, and that's the only thing people knew anything about, and 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 I just kind of thought, so if it's a Project 2025, do you think there was a Project 2024? like I know that um sometimes I can be kind of snarky. Yeah, I can be. I am, cuz reasons. Uh but I I also have to kind of check myself because I do forget. Um and I didn't always understand that people are not just like not reading. That's really, some people are, but we're talking anecdotal stuff. Like I literally know people and I also have to stop saying literally so much because I understand that's just yeah. Um, but it's also kind of a thing with people who talk a lot. Yeah, when you talk for a living, words are your friends, and they can kind of be frenemies. Uh, but I know people who don't like reading, and they will tell you, I don't like to read. And I'm like, anything? Really? And that is weird to me because I was the child who the way my mom would get me to stop asking her questions all day was to make me read. And then I realized, oh, well, this is how I can answer my question. And then it turned into me not asking my mom so many questions. Then it turned into telling my mom, Mommy, did you know? Like I'm sitting at the table eating breakfast, eating my cereal when she would let me have it because that wasn't often. But eating my cereal and I'm reading the ingredients. I'm reading the box. I'm reading everything on the box. All the ads and all the bullshit, and I'm reading the ingredients. And I'm asking my mom, what is whatever the chemical is, and I'm sounding and I can't pronounce it. And she would say, well, you can't ask me what it is if you can't pronounce it, because if you can't look it up, you can't look it up if you can't pronounce it. You can't spell it if you can't. So she would help me sound these words out, and then she would tell me, okay, go look it up, and I would go look it up. And that's how, and then she did tell me what does it mean? So I tell her what it means. Okay, so now that's what that word means, what does it mean in this, what you just read it from? I don't assume that everybody grew up with a parent like that, but I also don't assume that nobody else did. I don't assume that I was unusual, right? So I try not to come to these conversations about social relationships, and the way we exist in a settler colony with too many assumptions, right? I try not to, but sometimes they sneak in. So I have to remind myself when I am being snarky about people, being antagonistic toward reading theory and history, that it's not that mostly people just don't want to read. Is people have not been Uh, they have not been developed into confident readers. They have not been developed into people who appreciate getting information from reading. And that matters in the context of a society in which your average working people has your average working person has less leisure time, including all leisure time, sick leave, paternity, maternity, all leisure time off, whatever, have less leisure time than peasants in the Dark Ages. They had more time off as feudal serfs than, than we do today. so so in that context, where in order, in the first place, we live in a society where every human being needs shelter in order to survive. Like we can't survive in out in the wild with no cover. We need shelter. We can That is how we adapt to different climates. Shelter. Bears are fine without a shelter until they hibernate. Then they need shelter. Deer, elk, what else? Raccoons, foxes, snakes, birds, horses, dogs, cat, animals, mammals need shelter in order to survive the environment, because the environment changes from place to place, region to region, and from season to season. And then you got, on top of that, then you got climate change, which turns all of that on its head. But we still need, all mammals still need shelter to survive. Do the animals have to afford their shelter to survive? No, no, they don't. So when birds need to nest, they get their nest from nature. Nature provides the nest because nature governs the animals, right? When deer go somewhere and you don't see them in your yard anymore, well, they go somewhere to rest and to protect, be protected from the elements. Nature provides that for them. Animals that need to live in dens, nature provides that for them. What provides humans with the shelter we need to survive the environment? Humans are the only species of animal that is subjected to needing to pay for a human right, to have access to a human right. If all mammals need shelter to survive, and if human beings are mammals, then that means human beings need shelter to survive. And if a government's job is to take care of the people and to ensure the people that they govern have all of their human rights needs met, then why is this government making access to shelter a human right only available to people who can afford it? So here you are living in a country that commodifies the human right of housing, healthcare, education, a clean environment, clean water, clean air. In order to have access to all of those things, you have to be able to afford it in this society. So if you don't have a lot of money, you don't get a lot of those things. The people who have a lot of money have access to a lot more, and a lot better quality of those things. And the people who have money are the people who have the power, who make the decision to commodify everything that is a human right so that workers and the poor can only access these things if they can afford them. And so those people, the rich, don't want us to access those things the way they do, so they make sure that we do not have access to the same amount, the same level, the same quality of what they have access to. And that includes information. So, sure, when we are living in this kind of a society that has changed, even changed so drastically in the education system landscape, at least from what I remember when I was going to high school, I graduated high school in 1985. So we had social studies, we had civics, we had, when I was in school, we learned sex education and biology. We didn't have, at that time, at the school I went to, we didn't have sex education classes. We learned human reproduction and sexual behavior. That was what the textbook was called, I think. Human reproduction and sexual behavior as a part of biology. And now, what was it? We had art, like literal painting, sculpture, woodworking, home economics, and we had boys in home economics and we had girls in woodworking because I was in the woodworking class. We had shop. I tried to get in the shop class, I couldn't. And of course, we had music, we had band, but we also had music classes where kids could learn to play instruments. I graduated in 1985. All of that is gone. All of that is gone from the high school I used to go to, from most public schools around the country. So we really do have generations of students, of people. We have adults now who are a little younger than me, who have this antagonism toward reading, not because they're ignorant, like willfully ignorant, not because they are dumbing themselves down, but because capitalism and imperialism require an uneducated, uninformed populace. Because an uneducated and uninformed populace is much more easy to control than a country full of educated folks like in Iran, like in China. Y'all don't understand how much more educated the poorest person in China is, the poorest person in a place like Iran is. You don't understand how much more about global history, particularly revolutionary history, that the poorest person in Cuba has compared to what we know. And we're supposedly the richest, most powerful, most enlightened country in the world. We're supposedly the model for all things democratic and intellectual and civilized in the world. And we live in a settler colony that has manipulated access to knowledge in order to control the population so that we will always, um, by default, through that lack of understanding, through that lack of critical thinking, through that lack of knowledge of anything outside of what they tell us, that is how they get us to continue to support our oppression and the oppression of people all around the world. So this was the first show. Like I said, tomorrow, not tomorrow, next week. Next week, I am going to talk about the Powell Doctrine. And I'm going to talk about that in depth because I could not understand, because I hadn't made the connections, that people focusing solely and only on Project 2025 and Donald Trump. And I'm like, You don't know they've been trying to do this since the 70s? This is the end result of what they have been doing since the 70s. Like an organized effort since the 70s. That's what the Powell memo reflects. So we have to talk about that in depth. And I'm glad that that's all I'm going to talk about, I think, next week. I also wanted to talk a little bit um, about a conversation that we had on Black Liberation Media Thursday about sexual assault and that kind of stuff, because we were talking about Africa Bambata and all kinds of things. And um, I think I was describing something. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with there. I think I was trying to describe what I just said, the way that capitalism and colonialism commodifies everything, including dysfunction, and uses it as a way to control people, right? And I think I probably said it in a way that made it sound like I was saying, colonialism, or that patriarchy, or that capitalism created patriarchy. That's not what that's not what I was saying. See what I mean? You talk for a living, you talk all the time, you're real chatty, you're very loquacious. Words are great, they're your best friends, but sometimes they can kind of be confusing. So it is not that capitalism created patriarchy, because we do know that in ancient societies before colonization, and when I said capitalism, I was thinking specifically in terms of colonization. Before colonization, indigenous societies in what we now call the global South, the Americas, um, and West Asia and East Asia, North Africa, that kind of thing. We know, and when I say the Americas, I am talking about this part of yes, I mean the Americas. We know that pre colonization, indigenous societies were varied in their social structures and practices. There were patriarchal societies, or societies that practiced a type of patriarchy where leadership was limited to men. There were societies where that may not have been the case, but there were aspects of a gender hierarchy in society, say, like in the ancient Congo, where the priests had a tradition of taking multiple wives. Some people will say that's a form of patriarchy, because do the women get to have multiple husbands? No. And if that's the case, that only the men can have multiple wives, okay, that's unfair. That's patriarchy. That's men making the rules. They can have more of what they want, but the women can't. That's right. But there were also societies that were not patriarchal. There were matrilineal societies. There were societies that were governed by councils of mixed gender people. There were matriarchal societies that were led by women. And what is the what yeah, the maternal, the leadership, the leadership lineage of some societies was not passed down through the man, but passed down through the woman, right? We know that these societies existed, and we know that a lot of these societies were among the indigenous societies here. We know this is true of many indigenous societies in countries that are now encompass the global South, um, and all over the world. So yes, patriarchy was practiced in some societies, in some places. Other forms of society, or hierarchies in societies and gender relations or social relations, were also practiced all over the world at the same time. So, how did patriarchy as an institutional structure for the family as a foundation of society become globally accepted. My argument was that it was through colonialism. So I said capitalism, but what I meant was through colonialism, driven by capitalism. Because what did the colonists do? They came to a place. We know this from historical records from the European settler colonists here in their encounters with the indigenous. They refused to negotiate with the women in leadership, with the tribes that they encountered. Absolutely refused. And that was true everywhere else. So, what did they do? What did the colonists do when they came upon a society of people that had women in leadership and they had to answer to the women? You think they just went away and said, okay, we're not going to mess with them. Okay, we can't do any business with them. No, no. They told these people, this is not in our tradition. We don't have women in leadership in our tradition. We don't listen to that. We ain't doing that. So unless you change your leadership, we're just going to outright kill you all. Now, we know that eventually they did eventually just kill them all, right? And that speaks to the duplicity and the inherent dishonesty of colonizers, right? Because how you gonna go to somebody else's house and tell them, I don't like the way you you're touchy feely with your wife. You two seem like y'all are best friends, and it looks like she don't respect you. She treats you more like your friend. I don't like that. We don't do that in my house. We don't do that in my house. I know we were going to do this venture together, but unless this changes, no, I'm gonna get somebody else to do this business with me. Would you do that? That's what colonization does. Do you understand the gall you have to have? Just like the unmitigated settler colonial colonizing white supremacy gall. You have women in leadership. We don't think women should be in leadership. So you get the women out of leadership, or we're going to kill all of you and just take the stuff we want anyway. And then when these people who are thinking, hey, these other human beings, let's talk about this, because we're not going to change our leadership, but let's negotiate here. Let's let our leadership appoint somebody to talk to you, or however they wanted to manage to try to negotiate with these psychos. In the end, the negotiation didn't work, and those societies were punished brutally. They ended up being waged war upon anyway. Whether the female leadership was removed, changed, or represented by a front of men, it didn't matter. So I was thinking that rape culture, violence against women, rampant child abuse in every form, it is not so prevalent because men are the devil, which is what people will think. I don't think that is true. I don't think it's so prevalent because um it has always been around, and it has always been prevalent, because it has not always been prevalent, even though it has been evident in some ancient societies, and it arose for specific reasons in those different societies. That's a whole nother part of history we ain't got time to go into, but you know what I mean. I hope you know what I mean. That's not why we continue to have these problems. I don't think we continue to have these problems because men are inherently evil. I don't think that's true. Because if men are inherently evil, doesn't that mean women are inherently evil too? If the argument is, regardless of where the argument is coming from, whether it's a, a secular argument or whether it's a spiritual argument, if we believe we are equal, men and women are created equal, and we are equal in every way. If men are inherently evil, then wouldn't that mean we are inherently evil too? You don't want to go down that road. Don't go there. That's not. Men are inherently evil. And I don't believe that men are inherently wanting to dominate women. Men are conditioned to believe that about masculinity. They're conditioned to believe that about how they're supposed to be as men. Just like women are conditioned to believe that they are supposed to accept a little abuse from men. That comes from the colonial indoctrination that is a part of capitalist domination, I believe, because everything becomes a commodity. Everything becomes a part of the system in some way, whether it's good or bad. So the good that becomes part of a system that were the non patriarchal societies, the good of that is a part of the system is that we know those societies existed, right? I think in my mind, this is the way I'm thinking of it. And I hope you all realize that a lot of these shows, a lot of what I do is literally me thinking out loud, these kind of complex questions that I come up with when I see something, when I read something, when somebody tells me something about, did you know this happened? Did you know this company did? I start thinking about, wow, that's interesting. I didn't know how that was connected to X, Y, and Z. And I wonder, and instead of, having the thoughts by myself, I figure, well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it and see if we can make some sense of it. So yeah, this really is me thinking through why why we can't get rid of patriarchy. That is the question. Why is patriarchy so hard for us to get rid of? Why? Because I think it's not because men are evil, inherently evil. I don't think it's because women are inherently stupid. I don't, or inherent victims or inherently weaker. I don't think it's because patriarchy has always existed globally on a wide scale. I know that's not true. Um, so why is it so difficult to get rid of or to address? Because capitalism commodifies things that it can use to keep the colonized under control. And a way that control is carried out is that we are made to believe that the struggles we have with everything, if we can't afford if we can't find a job, that's our fault. We didn't get enough education. If we didn't graduate from high school, that's our fault. We didn't pay attention. If we graduated high school but can't find a job, that's our fault because we didn't study hard enough to get to college. If we go to college, graduate and can't graduate, it's our fault because we didn't study hard enough. If we graduated from college with a degree and can't find a job in our discipline, then it's our fault because we chose the wrong discipline. Um, or our grades weren't good enough. If we are able to find a job, but we are not getting paid what we know we deserve and we're not getting good benefits, it's our fault because we didn't choose the right job. Just go get another job. Right? At every step of the way, and that's just in education and employment. At every step of the way in a capitalist society, the oppressed are made to believe that their struggles are their fault. So the more time we spend on having conversations about men have always been patriarchal. Patriarchal societies have always existed, and men have always sexually abused women and children all over the world, while we are ignoring all of the matrilineal and matriarchal societies and non-hierarchical societies that existed. But we're also focusing on individual actions because we only have these conversations when a person or a group of people that we admire gets caught up in some kind of thing. Hence, we were having the conversation about African Bambata, right? But whenever we're having these conversations, even when we're talking about, Epstein and the Epstein files and all that kind of stuff, we're still talking about it in the context of Donald Trump. We're still talking about, there was no, what kind of, where is the conversation about what kind of system allows for people, not just men, because see, a system like this can't exist without a whole lot of facilitation and a whole lot of turning away and acting like you don't see anything. And that's not just men doing that, right? So while we are spending a lot of time talking about uh how an individual like Diddy could do what he did to the people he did it to, men and women, how people like Cosby could do what he did. We talk about how people like Weinstein, whatever the hell that man's name is, how could he do what he did? We keep focusing on individual people and how they could do what they did, and we never get to the system that facilitates them doing all this, and how that system also does the same thing with us. So patriarchy becomes, and all of the ravages and evils of patriarchy, and I think this goes for every other social ill that we struggle with, that weakens us, whether it's sexism, whether it's racism, whether it's ableism, ageism, and whatever it is. It's not that capitalism created these things. It's not that these things came out of capitalism necessarily. It is that capitalism, through colonization, imposed a European capitalist focused worldview on societies that had different systems for engaging and dealing with social problems than European capitalists did. And those systems did not benefit those capitalists the way they saw that they could. So instead of allowing the indigenous systems to continue practicing their social traditions and norms and punishments for breaking the social contract, punishments like expulsion. Like in a lot of indigenous pre-colonial societies, if you stole something from your neighbor, you had to give it back. You had to restore what you stole if you still had it. And then you had to pay some kind of restitution for the fact that you took it. And if you can't replace it, then you have to pay the restitution, right? And then you have to do something that your victim, demands that you do to make it right. Or if you hurt someone physically in any way, if you assaulted someone, if you injured someone, if you murdered someone, if you raped someone, you could be expelled from the community. Not out, out, because were there prisons, right? There were places where, yes, people who needed to be dealt with severely were held for an investigation and a review, and a communal decision was made on what to do with this person. But penitentiaries didn't exist, right? Penitentiaries are a European thing, because crime, antisocial behavior, can be commodified, right? So, okay, rape is horrible. Child abuse is horrible. Human trafficking, horrible. Yes, terrible. Even capitalists believe it's terrible, until they can make some money off of it. So then when they can make some money off of it, they have to protect the ways that they know full well they are using something that they know is wrong for them to profit off of. So they create the conditions And I know I'm skipping some steps and some analysis here, but these systems create the conditions where the victims, the oppressed, focus only on the individual committing the antisocial act and doesn't ever focus on the system that continues to allow, that has all, allegedly has all of the mechanisms to address, has the resources to address the so-called causes of these issues, but somehow never does. These issues keep happening. So we are always focusing on how horrible this person or these people are, but we never focus on why is it so difficult to educate children out of patriarchal behavior, right? Because we are still teaching our children that boys will be boys and girls just have to understand that boys don't know how to express themselves any other way than to pull your hair or hit you if they like you. So it is not that I think that capitalism created these things. It is that I think I understand that the reason we are still living with these social issues that we seem never to be able to understand is because we don't have an education system that provides us any real education or information that helps us develop as uh, um, decent human beings and productive. When they say productive citizens, what I mean by productive citizens is human beings who can get along with human beings who may not be like them in any way in a society and be peaceful so that everybody can be prosperous. That we can learn how to get along. We don't have an education system that will tell us the truth about the history of this place. We sure don't have an education system that will dismantle these ideas of patriarchy and sexism and racism and come on. And that is not, that doesn't happen because patriarchy always existed. Because, like I said, matrilineal societies existed too. How come we don't live with global matrilineal societies? Because matrilineal societies did not colonize the world. A patriarchal society did. I said all that just to get to that point, which was the point. And so you see why it takes me a little while to get to a cogent point, because I really do just have to kind of talk through the logic. And I do that on paper when I write, but usually the articles I write come out of these kinds of discussions that I either have with myself or I have with y'all on the Remix Morning Show, on Darker Than Blue, on Patreon, or with my, trusty pad and paper. I can never get rid of those. So that's what I wanted to say for this week. Please join me next week, where we are going to talk about the Powell memo and its far-reaching impacts. And I hope y'all have a good rest of the weekend. I hope it's going to be a little cooler, because I got to get outside and we got to do our gardening. You all have a great rest of your evening. Do something fun. Do something with somebody that you love. Tell them you love them, because time is indeed short. And I don't mean that in like a religious way. It's just look at what's going on around us. Stop wasting time. Love who you're with. Peace.